All right, welcome in everybody to the latest edition of Falls Count Anywhere podcast. Charlie Turner here, along with Chris DiCarlo and John Rustino, and our fancy new intro there to the show. Guys, how's it going on this Labor Day weekend?
Good. Yeah, love it. I love it. Thanks to John and Robin for that. And we got our new logo. We got our new shirts. We're rolling it into almost our 1 year anniversary. So this is great.
Absolutely, man. As we roll along here on the Falls Count Anywhere podcast, of course, we're always talking classic wrestling. We're talking current wrestling. Of course, today, though, we're going to be talking some classic wrestling. We have a very special guest with us today, a very recognizable name in the wrestling business. Chris, go ahead and take it away, buddy.
Yes, again, it is my honor and privilege to introduce this gentleman. He is a former Central States Tag Team Champion, a former Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion, former AWA Tag Team Champion, a former WFWA Champion, of course, a part of WWF history, the legendary Mr. Jim Brunzell.
Hey, geez, I can't remember all that, Chris. Holy smokes. That's 27 years in a nutshell right there.
That's it. Thanks for joining us. Have a good weekend.
All right. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, I thought you would like that. And of course, I've been a fan since 1980, 5 years old. So, I go way back, and we are definitely honored and privileged to have you join us, sir.
Well, Brian Blair and Greg Gagne and myself realized that in order to be fans of either the High Flyers or the Killer Bees, you got to be close to 50 now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or older.
Yeah. So, guys, we are absolutely thrilled to have Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, one half of the Killer Bees. If you grew up watching WWF wrestling like we did, very recognizable name in the business. Jim, first and foremost, again, thank you for joining us. We're just a couple of wrestling fans. 3 of us are wrestling fans, and we're just thrilled to have you on. We definitely want to talk about your career a little bit.
Sure.
But before we get into that, as far as present day, do you got anything going on wrestling-wise, or are you kind of just tapped out of the wrestling business at this point in your life?
Well, I'm fortunate enough that we both, Greg and I, and also Brian and I have an opportunity to do these WrestleCons, these bookings, and it's maybe once or twice a month, and you make some decent money, and you get to see some of your old buddies that you used to wrestle with, and then you get to mix and mingle with the fans, and it's a fun deal. I've been retired a year now, so. I look forward to it, and then I look forward to my grandsons are 17 and 14, and are both very active soccer players and very both skilled. So we watch them quite a bit. So, but it's fun. Awesome. I don't watch any wrestling anymore. Occasionally I'll flip on the channel and see what's, I can't tell the difference between the AEW and the WWE, so it doesn't really matter. And it's Cash in the Castle, or Cash in the pretty soon it's going to be Cash in the Outhouse.
Right.
They got to build a big outhouse there. And Vince McMahon himself will take the tickets at the door.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. And Jim, you mentioned your grandkids, and as far as like the family tree, is there anybody else that is looking to get involved in wrestling, or anybody else in your family?
No. My son sort of books me. My son has been involved with film festivals for about 20 years now. So a lot of people who are trying to contact me get his email or Facebook, and then all of a sudden I get a referral from him. So I always have to hit him up or give him 10% of whatever I get from those things. So no, I'm thankful for it though.
Well, Mr. Brunzell, we watched your show on the AWA Unleashed podcast with our friends there, Mr. Mick Karch and Christopher Tubbs, and obviously, though, a fan of yours before that, but that was such a great show that I've been trying to reach out to you ever since, and I'm thrilled.
Well, I appreciate it, Chris. It's funny. I've probably done, I don't know, at least 10 podcasts in the last year, and it's sort of fun. I've done I'm doing one coming up in Australia, and then I've done a couple over in Europe. And it's sort of interesting, how the fans and also the interviewers, approach you and with your career. But it's pretty much, I mean, once you talk about my career, it's just it stays the same.
Right.
Well, real quick, Charlie, I know you're chomping at the bit there, but real quick,
I got questions. Yeah,
I know we do. Of course we do. But Mr. Brunzell, real quick, like we mentioned off camera, a question from my friend, Mr. Tim Smith there in Greenville, South Carolina. Big Mid-Atlantic fan, of course, the Mid-Atlantic area and territory. His question to you, and of course I would like to know, was working at the WRAL studio and, of course, with the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, Bob Caudle, David Crockett, and that.
Well, I think the Crockett organization in the Mid-Atlantic were very blessed. They had some extremely great talent. I mean, they had Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat and Jimmy Snuka, and they had a great run there for a number of years. And like I said, it was a great area to work in because you could travel by car and wrestle and then at least get home every night, which was a huge benefit, especially to your family. And all of us were married and had kids, so it was fun. And like I said, the weather was good. 8 months out of the year is pretty doggone good. In the summer it's really hot and humid down in Charlotte, but it was a great area, and it helped me hone some more skills and watch different guys. And Rick Steamboat was incredible, still is, and Ric Flair, 74. I'm waiting for him to make a comeback at 80 again. So he might be out there and with a walker and some shades on, but where there's money, there's Rick.
Hey, maybe you could be the next opponent for.
Oh no, I've had 10 surgeries. I've had both knees replaced, both shoulders replaced, and a hip, and then I had 6 surgeries on my knees, which was a couple redos on one of my knees that got goofed up. So I'm happy when I can walk without a limp. So. But you got to hand it to Rick, get in the ring at 73,
getting busted open and all that stuff.
Oh yeah. Jesus!
Yeah,
I couldn't believe they would do an angle, especially for his retirement match. I mean, you think just retiring alone, would be enough, but I thought, holy jeez! But that's their area, so
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, as far as your career, we definitely want to talk a little bit more in depth about that. Your beginnings also in the AWA and teaming up with Greg Gagne. When you got into the wrestling business, because you were mostly a tag team wrestler, was it your intent to get into wrestling as a solo act, and it just kind of it turned out to be where you were ending up in tag teams? Or how did that come about? Or was it your goal to be in a tag team, once you got in?
Well, my goal was never to be a pro wrestler. I wanted to play football, and I wasn't good enough after college, and I remember trying to get a tryout with the Vikings one year right after I left the University of Minnesota. And the head scout, Jerry Reichhout, says, Jimmy, he says, we'd love to bring you on there, but he says, we hate to cut Minnesota kids. So, I sort of fell into the wrestling deal. As most people know, Greg and I were teammates at the university. We were both walk-ons as freshmen in 1967. He was a quarterback and I was a wide receiver. So he and I became very close and did very well moving the ball as freshmen against the varsity. And then, Greg introduced me to his dad, and I'd been out to his, to Gagne's house. And, I never had any ideas, ambitions about wrestling. And then after college, I had a brief little tryout with the Washington Redskins. And I played 1 year of semi-pro football in in Wisconsin for the Manitowoc Chiefs. And Greg called me and he said, "Hey," he says, "how would you like to try wrestling?" And I says, "What?" Because I'd done some intramural wrestling in high school, but never, anything beyond that. And he had told me that, well, Ken Patera is coming back from the Olympics. And then he said, we got a kid from Iran named Khosrow Vaziri, who was a national champion there. And then Bob Bruggers, who was a great athlete from Minnesota and played football in the NFL for a couple different teams. And then, Patera, Greg, and then the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. So I thought, well, I'm not doing anything. And what I was planning to do was going back to school and get my degree. I had about 30 credits left. So I thought, why not? So I jumped on that train and it took me all over the world.
That's awesome. And then, that initial experience, once you got into the wrestling business, we've heard a lot about, with past guests, as far as like the travel being very rigorous, going from one show to the next. Were you in those situations as well, where you're just constantly on the road, constantly traveling? And when you were, who were you traveling with? Was it always with Greg Gagne in the AWA, or was it just random guys that you would travel with?
Well, see, I got spoiled. Originally, they, right away after a couple months in the AWA, I think it was 1973 or so, they sent me down to Kansas City for more grooming. And I was, with Mike George down there, and we wrestled every night there. And basically it was twice a night. So that was my first exposure to the Funks and to the Briscoes. So I watched those guys in the ring, and I, said, geez, maybe I can incorporate that. And what happened was, again, you were able to get home. And I lived in a apartment, a studio apartment for $145 a month. That's in Kansas City. It was a place called Hunter's Glen. And I remember, coming back to the AWA after that. And the AWA to me was by far, and of course it's my hometown, but I mean, they had 12 to 14 guys that were the cream of the crop of the wrestling talent in the world. And then we only wrestled 14 to 16 days a month, and that was incredible because Vern realized that in Minnesota, much like Buffalo, I mean, it's seasonal. I mean, the winters, the people are all cooped in. And then during the spring and summer, they don't want to go inside. Right, to watch matches. So he gave us time off, which was great. So we had a good family life, and during the summer, we only wrestled 10 times a month.
And that's not bad. That's not bad schedule at all. Yeah.
And then, I went to Charlotte in 79 because I thought, well, I'm going to, I sort of got tired of being tag team. And then I thought I'd go down there by myself, and went down there and had a good, run as Mid-Atlantic champion. And then I missed home, so went back there, and then wound up doing 4 or 5 more years with Greg. And then finally, when Hulk Hogan left the AWA to go to the WWE, and Vince had taken, there was 26 territories that you could wrestle in if you were a pro wrestler, and then all of a sudden there's only a couple. So what happened was, because of Vince's television production, nobody could compete with him, and he had all the top talent in the world, and it got to the point where I had my own business too. I had I call it Jumpin' Jim Brunzell's gym. I had a co-ed gym in White Bear Lake, and I needed extra money to help get that going and keep it going, and it was just impossible at the AWA. Everybody had gone. You had Gino Kerlin, you had Hulk, you had Jesse Ventura, you had a lot of guys. Rick Martel, and Kurt Hennig left after. He didn't get there until I think it was later in 85 or 86 or 87, I think it was. But, and I had asked Vern for a guaranteed, salary, and it wasn't that much. It was $95,000 a year. And God bless him, he told me I wasn't worth it. And he said that, go to New York. So that's what I did.
Wow.
And they wound up, putting it, here's the deal. When you went to New York, what had happened, everybody who was still wrestling, the only place to go if you want to, still wrestle and make money was New York. And they had 60 guys and they ran 3 towns a night with 20 guys in the town. And they just kept, George Scott was a booker. And he said the best way to keep wrestlers happy is to book them every single night. And that's what he did. So there was, and then, shortly thereafter, they were teaming guys up because they figured, well, you got 60 guys. Let's see what we can do with tag teams. So they wound up, and Brian Blair was a friend of, Hulk's, Terry Bollea. So they decided to make us, a tag team. And it just turned out that Brunzell and Blair with Bees, and then also with the football team down in Miami, they were called the Killer Bees, the defense.
Yeah.
So that's where we got that. And we, I think we made our debut. I can't remember. I think it was up in Canada, but, it went pretty good, for 3 years, but it was just, Brian and I worked 52 days in a row without a day off.
Wow.
And also for 3.5 years, we averaged 27 days a month on the road for 3.5 years. And then they wondered how come guys were getting in trouble and guys were abusing drugs, abusing alcohol, having trouble at home life. You were gone all the time.
Right. Yeah. And then, and I'm sure too, with pain management, a lot of guys relied on that stuff.
Well, a lot of guys, were in the prime of their career, and then you just don't realize that the toll that pounding every night like that takes on your body. And I finally realized that I had my last match. It was with Jim Neidhart, and it was on my 50th birthday, and it was an indie show in Albert Lee, Minnesota. And after that match, Jim just about tore my head off. So I, in a headlock, and I realized that was it. I wasn't going to go in the ring anymore, and I didn't. And I just, and then all of a sudden, this osteoarthritis and these bone spurs just kept mounting and mounting and mounting, and I could barely walk, and I couldn't put my shirts on. So it was just a series of, having one knee done, and then the other knee done, and then the hip, and then one shoulder. And then this past February, I had my right shoulder replaced. And when they did it, I had, they caused damage to the ulnar nerve. So I have very little strength in my right hand. Wow. So I have to go back in a couple of weeks for this electrical test where they shoot electricity through your arm and find out where the nerve has been, impaired. So hopefully that'll be okay. But, most guys who wrestle, 10, 12 years or longer. And all of us did then, we were all 20 years, a lot of guys, all wound up getting, banged up pretty good.
Wow. And speaking of injuries, and as I'm looking up some of your history, and some websites had this, other websites didn't. So you never know what to believe sometimes on the internet. But during your first tag team title run, the High Flyers, I had read that you were injured in a softball game. Is that correct? And then had to
yes,
take the titles temporarily. And
what happened was we were playing in a Jerry Lewis telethon tournament, and actually there was Vikings, there was North Stars, and there was another team from the hockey. I think it was. I think it might have been either Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, but there was like 6 teams, and they were all pros, and the wrestlers won. Oh God, the Vikings were pissed, and we won the whole tournament. So what happened was it was warm, and I was playing third base, and I dove for a line drive, and I had a big old strawberry on the right shin. On the outside on the calf. So I didn't think anything of it. And 2 or 3 days later, I get an infection. So my knee swells up, and they put me on antibiotics, and they said, you can't go in the ring, So to logically take advantage of that, we gave up the titles and then, came back. And, I mean, that I couldn't wrestle for 6 weeks. I had that staph infection in my leg, and
wow.
Yeah, it was too bad. But, wouldn't you know it, after, being in the ring all those times and then, playing softball, benefit softball game, and you get
that's where right.
Yeah, a strawberry on your leg, who knows?
And then, so you had a good run there in AWA, because when you came back, eventually you did win the titles back from Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis, and you had a 2-year run with the tag belts at that point.
Yeah, well, here I just say what tremendous talent they had. I mean, honest to God, I mean, they had Adrian and Jesse as the East-West connection, and then they had Pat Patterson, Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel, and Jack Lanza and Bobby Duncombe, and Buddy Wolf was with his partner. I'm trying to think of his name now, but I mean, everybody there was extremely talented, and you learn something every night. And we used to go 25, 35 minutes every single night. Now you just wonder. I haven't been to a house show in, I don't know, 20 years for the WWE probably, but I just wondered if these guys can go over 25 minutes. It seems like they're doing all these high spots and false finishes throughout the match. So by the time 10 or 12 minutes, 15 minutes, I don't know what else they could do.
Yeah. I was going to say, and you mentioned like house shows, Jim, and my one of my first biggest thrills as a kid, 13 years old, I thought I was going to a house show, realized it was a TV taping for WWF Superstars, and I was thrilled, right? And I didn't realize until I was at that event that it was basically 4 hours, and you're recording 4 weeks worth of content. So, Killer Bees or whatever other team would be there that night, they would wrestle 3 or 4 times in one night just to fill those weekly shows. I never realized that was so. You're not only are you wrestling 27 times a month, you're wrestling 3 or 4 times a night.
Yeah, and then the next day we'd fly to Canada and do the same thing for 2 or 3 shows they do. They tape 3 shows for Canadian content.
Wow.
So we did that. That was back-to-back days. That was once a month. Ooh, that was rough.
We're familiar with that here. The benefit of us living near Canada, we were able to watch WWF Cavalcade, Billy Red Lions hosting, and we loved it because we had the advantage here in Niagara Falls of we got the normal 12 o'clock WWF Superstars. You get Wrestling Challenge a little bit later in the day, but in between, because we had the Canadian channel, we would get the Cavalcade as well. And sometimes we'd catch a match here and there that they wouldn't show on the other channel. So we felt like we were lucky to be so close to the border and catch all this stuff. It was really cool stuff.
And before that, it was the Maple Leaf Wrestling, which was the NWA. And then, like Mr. Brunzell said, when McMahon took over in '84, it was still Maple Leaf Wrestling, but it was all WWF guys. And of course, you mentioned Mr. Brunzell, Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens, right?
Yes.
And what a place.
It was fun. It was fun. Jack Tunney. And I remember it was sort of a running joke that Bobby Heenan used to say. He says, "Yeah, we'd go up to Toronto and fill the Toronto, gardens." And he says, then we go afterwards, and Jack Tunney would pay us in hot dogs and beer.
That's how we get paid here, actually.
Well, it was fun and it was memorable, and there was always a cast. The crew was good up there, and it was fun. And I miss those days. And then when the WWE, and I'm sure we'll get to this, it became such a grind. In those 80s, it was just, oh my gosh, you think, holy crap. And I remember I broke Greg Valentine by accident broke my hand. I had a double wrist lock, and I went to take him over, and he tried to block it. When he did, he snapped the middle of my hand, the bone in there. And this was in Rockford, Illinois. And I went home, but my hand swelled up pretty good. And I knew it was broken because I heard it. And I went to the doctor, and they waited one day to put the cast on to let it see if the swelling would go down. So they put the cast on, and I came back. I only missed 2 shots with the WWE, and then came back, and I think Brian and I won probably 20 matches in a row, me using my cast as a club.
Nice. Like
violating all the rules.
Bob Orton a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, violating all the rules, but the Killer Bees didn't have to put the mask on with it. Right. I had that cast.
The Cowboy Bob Orton, but before that, the Iron Mike Sharp.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Mike Sharp, God rest his soul. Yeah, he was a real character. I can tell you a quick story about him. He used to train a lot, and he didn't do too much weightlifting, but he did a lot of calisthenics, a lot of push-ups, sit-ups, free squats, and everything. And he would do this after the matches. So we're in the Boston Gardens one night, and he was on like second. So after about 2 hours, everybody's done, and Mike Sharp is still in the corner doing these exercises. And what had happened was he didn't realize that he went past the curfew, and they locked all the doors, and then they have dogs, guard dogs, in the Boston Garden. And so the guard dogs come into the locker room, and here's Mike Sharp, and they come after him, and he's up on top of the lockers when the police came. And that was hysterical, but I'm sure it didn't seem that way to Mike Sharp, but yeah, he was a real character. He made it out on, he never got bit, but I'm sure he
Chris,
decided to get out of there, before the matches ended after that.
Oh man. Chris, I know you got a question here, but guys, I know we got to take a sponsor break here. We want to do, I want to check in with our sponsors, take a quick commercial break. We are here with Mr. Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, one half of the Killer Bees. Again, man, we're pumped up to have you, Jim. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about your WWF career a little bit more in depth, some WrestleMania stuff and all that good stuff. So stick with us here. We'll be right back. Okay, and we're back with a huge logo on the screen. What's up, guys? Can we get rid of that?
Yeah. I don't know. This thing was freezing up over here. See, I'm just a third wheel. I'm sorry.
Technical. That's all right. A little technical difficulties.
Don't worry about it.
All good. Guys, we are here with Jim Brunzell. Chris, go ahead. I know you had a question for Jim there.
Well, I know John's got a question too, because actually, Mr. Brunzell, John's a little older than me. I'm 47. He's 50.
I'm the youngest
51. So he goes way back. But speaking of international, we got to have a shout out. We appreciate another guest that we had on the show a few months ago that you're familiar with. Live from Puerto Rico, he joined us, Mr. Jose Luis Rivera.
Oh, boy.
Yes, sir. The one part of the conquistadors there. And Jim, that kind of leads me into your World Wrestling Federation career. WWF time is when I got the most familiar with you, being a big WWF fan. A couple things that I forgot about. And when I went back looking at a few things on your career, at the Survivor Series, it was kind of a random team put together. It was yourself, Sam Houston, the Ultimate Warrior. There was a couple other guys in the mix there. Was that your first pay-per-view experience with the WWF?
That might have been either that, or also I was involved in King of the Ring deal, and that was in Boston, and I wrestled 5 times that night, and I think I lost to, I don't know if it was Don Morocco or somebody, but that was I don't know if that was a pay-per-view or not, but the Survivor Series might have been, the first one.
Yeah, and I watched the promo to that, and of course, the Ultimate Warrior, he's one of my favorites, right? Just the colors, the face paint, the tassels, right? There it is. There's that Survivor, the blue blazer there, and of course, Brutus Beefcake.
Yeah.
Now, that team there, that was, like I said, it was like a medley of talent, man. There was some different personalities there and some legends, such as yourself. I mean, what was it like working with the Warrior? Was he as wild as everybody says he was back then?
Well, I liked Jim Hetwig. Was a nice guy. He was a certified chiropractor.
Oh, I never knew that.
He was a chiropractor, and
Wow.
occasionally I used to ask him to adjust me. And I remember he got a little pissed one time, and he adjusted my necks so hard that my big toenail moved a little bit. So I thought it might have overdone it. But Jim. The Ultimate Warrior was purely a favorite of Vince McMahon. I like Jim, but at the same time, he couldn't do much in the ring. I mean, he was very limited in the ring. He had an incredible body. And then when he'd do his interviews, nobody understood what the interviews meant. He'd just go, grab the rope, and that was it. So, And Vince just went crazy about him. And I'll never forget the first time I saw him. We were in LA, and I was riding with Hulk, from the hotel, and it was Brian and Terry and I, and we got out of the car, and here's this bodybuilder with this tank top on, and he had the biggest lats. I mean, his lats were, and I looked and I said, who the heck is that? And it turned out to be Jim Hetwig, and he had a good run and all natural body, but it's just a shame that, he died so young. Jesus.
I know it. I remember watching that Monday Night Raw where he came back, and then that speech he gave in the ring. He was finally back in the WWE after all those years, and he was making amends with everybody at the Hall of Fame ceremony, and then his death the next day just shocked everybody. Yeah, because it was almost like a farewell speech. The night before on Raw.
Yeah, it was too bad. He had a good run there. He was a real character, and that's what Vince liked. Vince just was ecstatic when guys had 20-inch arms and had 4.5% body fat or less. He just went crazy. They could if they could walk 1 foot after another, they were going to be a star. So
and Jim, one thing I wanted to ask you about as well that I thought was cool was and I never realized this as well. I knew you were at WrestleMania 3, but I never realized that you were the match before the main event there. But that match that you had there against Nikolai Volkov and Iron Sheik, we talk about a lot on this show. We have fun with this tweet, by the way. But we get a good laugh out of that. But being in front of 93,000 at WrestleMania, what was that experience like there?
Well, originally when we were supposed to go on like third or second or third or something, but they moved us back, and they had us right before the main event, which was Hulk and Andre. And I think a lot of people were, they wanted to see Hulk and Andre. And so I think, I don't know, there was nothing between, Nikolai Volkov, and there was no angle leading up into that match. So it was just sort of thrown together. And to be honest with you, I thought the finish of the match, which again was George Scott, was horrible. I mean, we're false finishing Volkov and Sheik, and then all of a sudden they interfere, and then they start false finishing us. and out of nowhere comes Jim Duggan with the 2x4, runs into the ring, pulverizes those two guys. We get disqualified, and we're supposed to be happy that Jim Duggan came into the ring. I when George Scott told me that finish, I looked at him and I thought, what in the world have you been drinking? I mean, that was a horrible finish. I mean, why would we want to thank Jim Duggan for interfering and causing us to get disqualified? But
that's, and as you say that, it's funny because as I was watching that, I just rewatched it last night. Jesse Ventura on commentary said the same thing. He said, "Why are the Killer Bees happy? It just cost them the match. What the heck's going on?" So that was kind of a head scratcher there.
Well, I had some falling outs with George Scott. Actually, he fired me in North Carolina, and then when I found out he was going to be the booker in New York, I will never forget the first time I was in New York at Poughkeepsie, and then he came up to me and he says, "Jim, I just want to let you know, the past is all gone. We'll start fresh." And I said, "Good." But he was by far, and I know he passed away, God rest his soul, but he was by far the worst booker I've ever involved in my 27-year career. He had, I'll tell you, a finish. Do I have time to tell you a quick finish?
You got plenty of time.
This is in the Mid-Atlantic. So I had won the Mid-Atlantic Championship, and then I had a match on TV with the Iron Sheik. And during this match, he loaded his boot. Boom. He gave me the boot. Bam, down. I went and he covered me 1, 2, 3. So he's got the belt. So about 2 weeks later, I wrestle him again on TV, and I wind up getting a sleeper on him. And he goes out, and I take his boot off, and I run over to the interviewer, and I said, "I'm going to beat the Iron Sheik with his own boot." So they have a match in Roanoke, Virginia. I think it was a week later, and it was 3:00 in the afternoon. And then that night we had a match in Charlotte at 7:30. So I get to Roanoke, and Sandy Scott, who's the agent there, a brother of George, said to me, "Did you get the finish?" And I said, "No." I said, "What's the finish?" And he says, "Well, George wants you to do a Broadway 60-minute time limit." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, he wants you to go through an hour." And I said, "Sandy," I said, "you might as well dig a hole in the middle of the ring and bury Jim Brunzell there, because I'll be dead as a babyface if I can't beat this guy with his gimmick boot in an hour." So I was so frustrated. I thought, wow. And then Cosgrove says, "I lead the match." So I said, "Okay." So, and normally a heel leads the match. And what happened was he goofed up 3 high spots in a row that he called in this match. And he says, "Jim, you call the match now." And I said, "Okay, guys." So we had the match, and I was furious. And then we come back to Charlotte, and we had to do a 45-minute time limit there. Wow. So about 2 weeks later, I'm wrestling. Cosgrove and I are wrestling in this small Native American. It was some sort of an Indian place, little town. And they said, "We want you to go through an hour, another draw." And I said, "Oh, geez." So we're having a match. Cosgrove goes outside, and he says, "Oh, Jim, I hurt my back. So I wind up, we get double count out on the floor. And the next day I get a call in the morning, and they said, "George wants to talk to you right away. Can you come in?" And I said, "Sure." So I come in, and George says to me, he says, "Hey," "you were supposed to go an hour draw last night." And he said, you both guys got disqualified. And he said, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "Well, Cosgrove told me he hurt his back." And George says, "Well, I just talked to Cosgrove, and he said he was fine." So I got
trying to get out of it. Yeah.
So I got fired.
Oh wow.
Man. But it was time to leave, and I was so happy to get out of North Carolina, and it worked out okay. I wound up going to Japan and being Nick Bockwinkel's partner over there. And we had a great 4-week tour over there. And then I came back, and they reestablished the, High Flyers for the last, 4 or 5 years before I went to New York.
John, you got a question?
My biggest question was Minnesota's incredible when it comes to professional wrestlers. I mean, some of the greats of all time have come out of that state. Do you have any? I mean, it's like back. I mean, the names I can't even go through them all. Could you tell me who's the? It's probably a hard one. Who would be the greatest?
Well, I know he wasn't really started here, but Bobby Heenan was the greatest talent that I ever saw in the ring. Been within the ring. He could wrestle. His timing, his everything he did was incredible. I mean, he gave the people what they wanted every single night. And he only had an 8th grade education. But I will say, as far as the wrestling talent, after that, I'd say Nick Bockwinkel, who, Nick was 6'2", 250, and just incredible in the ring. He was a wrestling heel, and I remember seeing a match, and it was sort of an old timers match, and it was a pay-per-view down in Georgia, and I was there with Wahoo and somebody else against Morocco and somebody, but it was one of the main events was Dory Funk Jr. and Nick Bockwinkel, and they went like 30-minute draw. It was incredible. I mean, those two guys stole the show, and Nick was great, and he was. But they had such great talent here. I mean, But I think Bobby Heenan, greatest overall talent, and I'll tell you a real quick story about him. When Bobby was done, and he wrote a book, he had a guy write a book, and he came to Minneapolis, and he was going to do a shot on WCCO, which is our huge AM, radio show. And it was at night, and I picked him up at the airport and took him to the hotel, and then I brought him over to the WCCO studio where the character, the radio character personality, his name was Dark Star, and he was a big racehorse enthusiast, but he also was a huge wrestling fan. So we get on the air, and Dark looks at him, and he says, Bobby Heenan, he says, doggone it, he says, every time I see you in matches or tapes, he says, you're always getting hit in the head with those steel chairs. And he said, did you by any chance know how many times you got hit in the head with a steel chair? And Bobby just looked at him, and he says, Dark, he says, I got hit so many times in the head with a steel chair. He says, the top of my head smells like ass. And honest to God, you would not. Dark Star fell out of his chair laughing. He saw you kill me, and this is on live radio, and it was just hilarious. And that's the type of talent Bobby was. He was
my absolute favorite color commentator of all time was Bobby Heenan. His quick wit, his one-liners, just legendary, man.
And the more vodka he drank, the better he got.
and he played the role of the Weasel so well too. Just that evil manager that was trying to get away with something all the time, and he played that role so perfectly.
Well, now the managers, I mean, there's not really managers, other than guys that are talking for their guys. But, when Bobby was in the WWE, he went out with about 3 or 4 different talent, and he had, it was just incredible what he did. And they milked him for, I mean, he used to do interview, honest to God, he was, he'd do, for each city, I bet he was out there, at least 3 or 4 times with different talent, and this went on, and they worked the hell out of him for, 10 years.
Yeah, one of my favorite managers, absolutely.
Then when he wound up getting cancer of the mouth, and he finally, he passed away, and matter of fact, his wife just passed away a month ago. Cindy from cancer. But I went down to the funeral, and I noticed there wasn't anybody from the WWE there for Bobby Heenan's funeral, and there was just one guy who I think was involved with the TV production. I can't remember his name now, but that was it. There was no
that's surprising.
And and the same thing for Gene Okerlund's funeral. When I went down there was 22 people at the funeral.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. Those guys, without those guys, I mean, you can talk about your Hulk Hogan's and like your big time marquee names, but without guys like Mean Gene, Bobby Heenan to facilitate with those guys, I mean, it doesn't work, right? So yeah, that's surprising to hear that. And it was so sad to see Bobby go through that the final years of his life where he couldn't speak, and it was just so heartbreaking to see. So
yeah, it was. Yeah, he was a dear friend.
Yeah, and again, like I said, one of my all-time favorites, and I'm sure for a lot of people as well. Yeah. And a lot of people compare. They'll talk about Paul Heyman, and they'll talk about, is Paul Heyman the greatest manager of all time? I still say no. It's still
God, no. I got to tell you, I met Paul Heyman. Mary and I, my wife and I, were the very first time we were in New York, and we were standing outside Studio 54, and there's a huge line. So this young kid comes up to me and he says, "You're Jim Brunzell?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Come on with me." So he takes me up to the front and he talks to the bouncer, and I go right in, and I said, "What's your name?" And he says, "My name's Paul Heyman." And he was a photographer or something then. And little did I know, I'll email him once in a while, and I said, "God, you've come a long way since Studio 54," but he got us in there, that. And he's done a good job, but his character with what's his name, the kid from Minnesota, the big guy, god dang, I can't.
Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, Brock Lesnar. And then he's done a good job, but there's just nobody that could do what Bobby did on the mic and then also in the ring as a manager. I mean, he'd take those screwy bumps, and God, he damn near killed himself, but yeah, but Paul Heyman's done a good job.
Now, Jim, you I didn't realize this, and maybe I just forgot about it, but the Killer Bees had a real brief heel turn. If the research I did was accurate.
No.
Right? Is that correct? You guys were more like sinister with the masks and that type of thing?
No.
So that was incorrect.
That was incorrect. The deal was Vince could have done that with us. But here's the deal. We were supposed to get the belts, never got them. And Brian Blair was so frustrated with Vince and both George Scott and Vince had said that we would be getting that. Matter of fact, the night we wrestled the Hart Foundation, we the first time we wore the mask was in Buffalo, and we wound up doing the switcheroo, and boom, we popped the people with it. They got beat 1, 2, 3, but then they said, they took it away, but the people went absolutely crazy. And I think that is still on YouTube. If you look that up, and it was from Buffalo, because I remember I was late getting in there, and I wound up where I was waiting for my ride on the corner with the quarterback, Kelly.
Jim Kelly. Oh,
yeah,
cool.
From the Buffalo Bills. And I looked at him and I said, "You're the quarterback." And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I'm wrestling, And then boom, a car picked me up and a car picked him up. But that was sort of strange. But that was in Buffalo, and that was a great, oh God, what a match we had. And if they would have given us the belts, we would, it would have been, we had so many people, different tag teams to work with. And we worked with Martel and
Tom Zink.
Oh yeah, the Can-Am connection.
Yes, and had a great match with them. We had 2 or 3 great matches with British Bulldogs, and then we had good matches with Beefcake and Valentine, and it was
Demolition.
Demolition too. But it was just for some reason or other. Well, to be honest with you, I'll tell you right now, Vince never liked me from the very beginning, and that's okay. I remember I did my first interview, Poughkeepsie, and Gene Okerlund took me aside and he said, "Jim, we're going to just do a babyface interview, introduce you to the people of the WWE." So he talks to me, and I'm not yelling at anybody, and I'm not, whatever. So I do the interview, and as I walk off the set, I hear Vince say, "Oh God, another Backlund." So I knew I was doomed right then. And Bobby and I and Bobby and I have been great friends, and he was a great talent. But he was a real humble babyface, and he wasn't outlandish like so many of the character babyfaces have been. You just can't do that if you're a all-American type, athletic babyface. You can't go crazy.
But you bring up a good point, because it's like you guys, the Killer Bees, you guys had the LJN figures, you had you were in the WWF magazine with the merchandise, and so you guys were there. I mean, I always consider the Killer Bees up there with the top tier team. So it was surprising to me too, looking back, that there was never a title run for you guys.
Well, that would have been absolutely the frosting on the cake. And then also another thing that has bothered my partner a little more than me is that we never got into the WWE Hall of Fame. Right. So it's funny because this fan sort of realized this, and he sent us 2 knockoff rings of the Wrestling Hall of Fame WWE. So occasionally, I can barely put it on now, but I'll just put it on. And then I said to Brian, I says, here's our rings.
But I'll tell you what, and Chris and John, we've talked about it, the WWE Hall of Fame. There's a lot of politics involved, as I'm sure you know, Jim. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are missing from that Hall of Fame. Demolition, as we mentioned, being one of them as well.
Rick Martel, Tony Gurria, the list goes on and on. That should be in that Hall of Fame.
I know it.
Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, I know it. Wow, that's Vince. He does it for publicity. He puts these people in, and they tried for 20 years to get Bruno Sammartino to go in there, and he would not. He says, "No, I don't want to be affiliated with you and the WWE because I don't like it. It's not my style." And then finally he came to. They probably gave him enough money, which was probably right.
Yeah, good for him for holding out till he got it. Yeah.
So, Mr. Brunzell, I got 3 quick questions for you. Number 1, you guys, you and the High Flyers had a good match, and tell us about working with the Road Warriors in 1985, 86, their AWA.
Hardest team ever to work with, because what made the Road Warriors so successful is they used to go on TV and say, you know what, we're going to beat the shit out of those guys. And then they go in the ring and they would, because it was hard for them. They didn't want to injure their personalities. So they didn't want to sell. And you can't have a match if like I remember Mike, God rest his soul, and both Joe, they both passed away way too early. Yeah. I remember Mike telling me, he said, Jim, he said, I hope you don't mind, but I'm not going to go down for your drop kick. He says, I'll just stagger. And then I said, okay, I won't go down for your clothesline either.
There you go. Yeah.
And he looked at me and he smiled, but it was hard, and we wound up having a good match with them up in Winnipeg. And I think it was that wasn't going anywhere, that deal, because it would have just been too hard to deal with the politics of who's going to win, and how the team's going to look, and that's the way it was.
Second, Mr. Brunzell, your experience in the WWF WrestleMania 2, that Battle Royal in Chicago, Illinois, with the football players.
Well, I was just happy to be involved. That everybody was looking for the payoff, and it was okay. I mean, that the football players, they had the guys from Dallas and a couple guys from the Bears and everything, and they were good guys. And they went around. They realized that they weren't in their element, and I think they got a great impression of watching live, of what is entailed in telling a story in a pro wrestling match. And I think a lot of them were happy to see and to be part of it. I'm sure they got paid more than we did, but it was sort of fun.
Yeah, also, and then thirdly, just a couple of names, characters in the WWF, George the Animal Steel, the Missing Link, Andre the Giant, Big John Studd, wow.
Well, I tell you, we had a match in New York, Lake Placid, New York. It was an 8-man tag. It was George the Animal Steel. It was Coco Beware. It was Brian Blair and me against, I can't remember, the Hearts and somebody else. And at the end of the match, we won. And what had happened was we all had our Killer Bee masks on. So there's 4 of us dancing around in the ring. Coco's got his bird hanging from his hand. Brian and I are sort of, happy. And then George the Animal Steel put his mask on sideways so he couldn't mouth, and he was trying to bite the turnbuckle like he normally does, So I looked at Brian and I says, Brian, I says, I think the Killer Bees are dead. this deal right now, which was, and the fan, I mean, it was hilarious, but it sort of kills your gimmick, when 4 people put on your mask. Right. But George would, and he was I think he was a college coach or a high school coach and a teacher. And he was a genius in what he did, because he knew that portrayal of that goofy George the Animal was incredible.
The green tongue and everything.
Oh gosh. Yeah, he was a character, and a lot of the characters that one of my dear friends today is Hillbilly Jim Morris, and he was a very gifted basketball player, and also. A lot of people don't realize it, but he's a tremendous guitar talent. Oh, can he play the guitar? Yeah. And he still has a position. He's with Sirius Satellite Radio. He's one of their on-air hosts there, and they call it Hillbilly's Moonshine Matinee. That's what he calls his show. And cool. He's he was very good, and just a dear friend. We've stayed real close, but there was a lot of characters, and I I feel very blessed that I had a career as long as I did, and I had that one injury, a broken hand, and then I remember one night in Roanoke, Virginia, not Roanoke, Richmond, Virginia. Cosroe we were wrestling, and he got me choked out to the point where I was almost out on my feet, and he threw me through the ropes, and I led with my head on the concrete floor, and I hit this brow, and I had 29 stitches. So they were doing a documentary on Cosroe, and they were interviewing me, and they said, "What can you say about Cosroe Vaziri?" And I said, "Well, he was the only guy that after wrestling him that I had required to get stitches in my head." And I said, also, I had the worst match I ever had in my career with him in Roanoke when we did the hour draw when I had his boot on. And the guy looked at me, and his mouth sort of dropped. I said, but he was a good guy.
Yeah, and the casual wrestling fans who say, "Oh, it's fake," like no, it's scripted, but it's not faked.
That's right.
It's and it's you guys. You talk about all the surgeries you've gone through, stitches, all that stuff, and I know there's plenty of documentaries I've watched on guys going through multiple knee surgeries, hip surgeries, back. I know Hulk Hogan's gone through a lot.
He's had 10 surgeries on his back. He can barely walk.
Yeah,
my partner Brian Blair. 2 on his knee, 3 on his neck, and 3 on his back, and he's got to have a complete back, refusement of his back in October.
Wow. Well, Jim, we could have you on for another 3 or 4 hours and talk wrestling, man. I don't want to keep you all day. We know your time is sensitive, man, but just being able to get into a little bit of your career and some of these wrestling stories has been I could hopefully speak for both of us, Chris. It's been a thrill for us to be able to do it because, we only get so many opportunities to speak with guys that have been in the business as much as you have. And
I got to show you this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is a book available. I wrote this 6 years ago, wrote every single word of it. And it's available at Blurb, BLURB, online. It's $25. And it really encompasses my total career. I got a nice picture in the spread.
Oh, awesome.
Bruce and I, and so I always sort of plug that, and I appreciate you guys let me have the opportunity to do that. But thank you so much. I enjoyed it. It's always fun to talk wrestling and the good times, and the good times far outweighed the bad times in pro wrestling. So like I said, I was blessed with a great wife and a great family. And I'm just happy I could entertain some fans today.
Yes, sir. We were absolutely thrilled to have you on. We were talking about it all week. We've got one half of the Killer Bees coming to join us, man. So we were thrilled about it. We were so pumped to have you on. And Jim, anytime you want to come back and join us, we'd love to have you back because there's so many more things we want to ask you about. We'd love to have you back one time.
I'll come back.
Down the road, sir. All right. And you have a great Labor Day weekend, sir.
Same to you, Charlie, Chris, and John. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Awesome interview there with Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, one half of the legendary Killer Bees of the World Wrestling Federation. Of course, all his career with the AWA and NWA and Mid-Atlantic. Man, we just only scratched the surface. Yeah, I mean, we only just barely scratched the surface. It feels like we could have. Man, we should change the format to like half a day. You know, we go on from like 11 to like 6 p.m. When we get a guest like that, just to be able to talk some of those
the
old
stories alone. The stories alone. Yeah,
I know.
It's a thrill for us, man. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But guys, we want some public service announcements we want to get to before we wrap up here.
Well, real quick, hang on, John. I got 2 shout outs. We'd like to say a big thank you to our friend Danielle, who designed our new logo and shirts.
Danielle.
And that is daretodreamgraphics.com. That's daretodreamgraphics.com. You can check her out, and she does all kinds of great things there. And also to Green Star Home Services. They do, furnace, air conditioning, bring your house energy efficient. Now
there you go. Get it tuned up, man. We're coming up on the winter. Get your furnace.
And a shout out to them, Randy, Dylan, Molly, the whole gang. And they're at greenstarhs.com. And real quick, I know John, Charlie, we'd like to thank our viewers, of course, on Facebook here, our home. On Twitter, we retweet it, and Twitter's getting big. Spotify is growing. And, of course, our new YouTube at Friends with a Z Media Network.com. There you go, John. We have all our shows there, not just this one, but all of our shows. And it's growing, too. And we'd like to thank all the viewers on all our platforms.
Yeah, we gained 15 followers on Facebook, man. And that's probably 15, big deal. For me, it's a big deal, right? I'm pumped about that.
Deal.
So cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for everybody that's giving us a follow on all of our social media outlets there. Thank you.
And John, go ahead.
Like we do every week, I want to put up this number. It's 1-800-656-4673. It's called RAIN with an extra N. If you out there around the country, Canada also, if you've ever been in a situation where you have been assaulted, you've been sexually assaulted as a child, even currently, and you don't know what to do, you don't know where to go, call this number, 1-800-656-4673. They are there every day, even Christmas. You know, they're always there. There's always someone there to talk to. It's completely anonymous, and they will get you to a YWCA in your area, whether you're in Canada or the United States. So please, this number, if you've had those issues, and one quick thing, and I'm done with, I'll let you guys go, is if you're the loved one of someone who's ever been hurt that way, and it's hard to process their mindset, give them a call. They'll help you.
Awesome. Thanks for that information, John. We appreciate it. We are a show of the people, as we like to say. So we want to throw that important information out there out to the public. Guys, we're wrapping up here. It's a Labor Day weekend. I want you guys to enjoy it. You know, get the grill out. We're starting up on some college football tonight. I know, John, you're pumped about that. You're an Ohio State fan. I got a soft spot a little bit for Notre Dame. Chris, I know you do too. So it's going to be a heck of a battle tonight, Notre Dame and Ohio State. We're looking forward to that. Of course, we got NFL on the horizon. But aside from all that stuff, have a great Labor Day weekend to everybody. And what do we got, Chris? Am I going too fast?
How can we forget? We got a wrestling weekend going on the Labor Day weekend too, right? We got 2 pay-per-views today and tomorrow.
We do. We kind of mentioned Clash at the Castle, which is 1 o'clock today. So we're airing this at 2 p.m., of course. So it's already in progress. Clash at the Castle. Check that out. Roman Reigns defending against Drew McIntyre. Love what Triple H has been doing so far with WWE, and we might see a return, possibly of Bray Wyatt tonight or today. That's been rumored. Braun Strowman has been signed back to WWE, and I look forward to seeing him back in the mix as well. And then also the AEW. Thanks for mentioning this, Chris. I almost completely forgot, man. AEW All Out. We got Moxley and CM Punk, their big match going on tomorrow night with a huge card for AEW. And then, of course, AEW coming right here to Buffalo on Wednesday for AEW Dynamite on Wednesday, September 7th. It's going to be the follow-up show to All Out, so it should be pretty exciting. So keep an eye out on that. We're going to be covering that on the shows to come. We expect to have some other great guests as well, as we did today with Mr. Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, one half of the Killer Bees. Thank you again to him. Gentlemen, thanks again for an awesome show. We'll be back to our regular format to unleash the classic clips and, of course, check in with the Iron Sheik as well. But thanks again, guys, and have a great one.
Yes, thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Thank you for watching. If you liked our video, then click the like button below and the subscribe button to be notified when a new video is uploaded. Here are some of our other videos. Remember to leave a comment below.